Most programs have settings that you can customize and configure. Revit is no exception. In this movie, we will look at the ways you can configure your overall Revit experience. All of the settings we will consider here can be considered set it and forget it. In other words, once you've configured one of these settings, it will remain in effect on your computer until you decide to change it. So let's start with the recent file screen, which is what typically greets you when you first launch Revit. Here you'll see the project area and the families area, and it will list out a few templates over here. Now you can customize what these templates are. So by default, I have the architectural template and the construction template because I'm using Revit architecture. But if I wanted to change that and introduce some different templates, maybe my office standard template and what have you, I could go to the big R here, and down here towards the bottom, I can go to the options dialog, and on the file locations tab, you're going to see those two items that we saw right there on recent files. And you can simply use this add value right here to browse out to an office standard template and add that to the list. You can also remove either of these if you didn't want those, and you can use these buttons here to reorder them if you wanted them in a different order. Now, while we're here on the File Locations tab, this is also the place where if you don't specify otherwise, your files will be saved. So when I do save, it's going to go to my Documents folder in my case, which is listed right here. If I wanted to put that in a different location, a lot of firms will do a folder right on the C drive, for example, called Revit Local Files or something along those lines. You could indicate that here using the Browse button. It also is where you would point to template files. So again, if you have Office Standard template files and they're up on a server, you can change this path here. Now back on the General tab, you've got things like how often you want to be reminded to save and what your username is. And if you're using work sharing, which is a feature that allows multiple users to access a Revit project at the same time, it's a very popular feature that you'll be using in team projects. You can set the frequency that work sharing will update here, and this username is actually what will be used by the central file when you're in the work sharing type files. If you're in a standalone project, then the username really doesn't come into play. Now, I have Revit Architecture installed here, but there's also the product called just simply Revit, or sometimes people refer to it as OneBox. This is the product that includes all three disciplines, architecture, MEP, and structure. If you have that version of Revit, then you'll see pretty much the same options dialog, except you'll have a few additional options that will allow you to decide which tabs you want to turn on and off here in the background. So you can see that I have architecture and structure. You could add a systems tab and so on, and you could even add an analysis tab and determine which panels would appear on that analysis tab. And you'll find those settings in general and under user interface. You'll also see here that you'll be able to choose a discipline that you want to start Revit in. So mine is starting in architectural, but if I was more mechanical or plumbing, I could choose one of those disciplines. Under graphics, you can change things like background color and size of temporary dimensions and turn on hardware acceleration. You might want to talk to your CAD or your BIM manager to determine what the best choices are for the settings there. We've also got settings for things like rendering and spell checking and so on. Most of those, the defaults are pretty good to get started, so I'm not going to actually make any changes there, but certainly if you need to, you could configure some of those settings. As I said at the beginning, anything that you set in this dialog is, for the most part, set it and forget it. So you can get your settings configured the way that you like, and then just pretty much leave them alone, and they will remain that way in Revit until and if you decide to come back and change them later. For the most part, Revit's ready to use out of the box. Pretty good idea to take a look at the options just to familiarize yourself with what's possible, but you really shouldn't need to change anything unless you have a specific reason to do so. And again, if you have a CAD or a BIM manager, you might want to check with them to see what the best choice of settings are.